Hello. If you enjoy the video you're about to watch, please give it a like, and if you have any comments, put them in the comment section. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. And as I noticed when I went to edit this thing, when I was going to take the flats, I didn't have the camera hooked up. So when you're going to take your flats, make sure you put the camera on the optical tube. Now on with the show. Hello. Today I'd like to discuss darks and flats. Darks are used to overcome imperfections in the sensor of your camera, and flats are used to overcome physical and photographic imperfections in your optical tube. We'll start with darks. All you have to do to take darks is take your camera, plug it into your PC or your laptop, put the cap on it, go into your capture software and select the exposure and gain you're going to be using when you're taking lights, when you're taking your subs outside. I usually use Unity Gain. This is a SV705 by SV Boney, which uses the IMX 585 chip. So Unity Gain for this is 250. So I set my gain on 250. I set my exposure on 15 seconds because I normally take 15-second exposures. I'll also take a second and third set of darks at 300 and 350, higher than the Unity Gain value, in case I put a filter in which blocks part of the light, just to make sure I'm getting enough light for the sub to work. So I set the settings up, and then in my software I say capture darks. I usually take 30 darks. It is important when you're taking darks that you take the darks and the lights, the sub you're going to take when you're actually photographing, at about the same temperature. 5 or 6 degrees either way doesn't matter all that much. But if you take them indoors where it's 70 and you go outside where it's 50, that's enough of a difference so that your darks aren't going to work very well. You'll know they're not working because you're going to get hot and cold pixels, little red and green speckles that are showing up on your subs. And if you have an unshielded camera, like the IMX 294, you're going to get sparkly, it looks like a sparkler, yeah, on one side of the screen. And that's light, photons in fact, coming from the camera hardware that's capturing. If the camera is shielded, like an IMX 533 or the IMX 585, you won't get the little sparkles because they're shielded. So I take my 30 subs and then I'm done. You might find that you won't have that problem if you're using a cool camera. It's big and heavy because it's got a refrigerator in there. If you're using a cool camera and you have cooling on, you won't have the problem of camera overheating. If you're using a little planetary camera, after a couple hours the camera may heat up enough so that the darks cease to work. You'll notice hot and cold pixels starting to appear. That's because there's the temperature at which the darks are taken is far enough away from the current temperature of the camera so that it's ignoring the darks or overcoming them. Flats, on the other hand, are used to overcome vignetting and dust motes. Dust motes would be like little black spots appearing on your photograph and your subs. You can sometimes clean some of those off. I have 7 SV Bony cameras. This is the only one I own that has any dust motes on it, and I've never been able to get them off. As far as the vignetting goes, vignetting is easy to explain. If this square here is your sensor on your camera, a little rectangular sensor. If this rectangle is your sensor and the circle is the cone of light that's coming through and it hits the sensor and it's small like this one, that means the sensor won't be fully illuminated. And you're going to have a circle in your picture where it's well lit and it's going to be dark outside of that. 2 causes for that. One is you have a big sensor and a little small, there's 1 1/4 small hole that the light has to come through, the light cone, that can't be bigger than 1 1/4 because that's the hole it's coming through. Whereas if you have a 2-inch focuser like this one, you got a 50mm hole. So that can take a much larger sensor without vignetting. Even with that, however, if you add one of these things, a field reducer, you can get vignetting. This has a 420mm focal length. That's long enough I don't get vignetting, but if I add the 0.8 field reducer, all of a sudden the focal length is 336. And that's kind of short. The shorter the focal length, the narrower the cone is going to be. So if you have a very short focal length and a very small hole the light has to come through, you're going to get a lot of vignetting. That's the case with the Hyperstar. The field reducer goes from 1500 to 300 in my 6-inch. And it only has a 28mm hole to begin with. That's smaller than the 1 1/4. So it's very prone to vignetting. So here's how I take, now I've watched several dozen videos on this, read 30 or 40 articles, and I followed the instructions on every video and it never worked. I then experimented, a ton of experiments, night after night. In fact, I would have for that night, my only objective would be to make some flats that would work with my Hyperstar. I'd sit there and make 10 or 15 different flats using different values. What I found worked for me is I put the gain at the gain I'm going to use when I'm taking my lights, when I'm taking the subs. The exposure I set so that the histogram is at 50%. Now some folks will say 30 to 50. I find 50 works best. I've tried everything up to 80. At 80, by the way, you get reverse vignetting. The center is dark and it gets brighter on the outside. But if I use the gain I'm going to use in the lights, and if I use whatever exposure required to get my histogram to read 50%, and if I'm using if I'm going to have a filter in it, I want to put the filter in when I'm taking the flats. I don't want to add a filter afterwards. In fact, you don't want to change anything in the optical train after you've taken your flats. If you do, the flats won't work. Even if you just rotate it a little bit, the flats won't work. Anything at all. So I use the same gain that I'm using and the same offset in my subs, in my my lights, and I use whatever exposure is required to get the histogram to 50%. I don't take bias frames or dark flats. I hadn't found that makes a big difference, and I've read in several sources that modern cameras don't really require either of those. Doing this, I find that my flats work. Yay! Even with a big sensor like an IMX294, they work pretty well. And I'm using the same gain, by the way, on my darks and flats. Different exposures, though, because I've got to get to 50%. Anything else? Yes. Temperature matters a lot. Like darks, if you're wildly different in the temperature from when you take the flat and when you take the lights, the subs, the flats won't work. And if the camera heats up after a couple hours, your flats will quit working. That happens, stop and let it rest or take a new set of flats. And that's what I found works for me from a Hyperstar, which really needs flats because it really loves vignetting with the big reducer and the tiny hole. I do recommend you watch someone else's videos, half a dozen people, on how to take darks and flats, and try them all, and if any of them work for you, great. And if they don't, do like I did and run experiments for 3 or 4 weeks till you finally get something that works with your optical tube and your cameras. Yeah. As far as the physical means used to take flats, you point your optical tube up. Some folks can say you can use an evenly illuminated ceiling or the sky if it's evenly illuminated. Some folks put a sock or a piece of paper. I use these things. Light panel. Oh, when you use the light panel, don't have it real bright, because if you do, the LEDs will show up and have checkerboards in your flats, and they don't work well. So I turn it down just enough so I can illuminate the thing, and then I adjust my exposure as needed to get the histogram up to 50%. And then I take my flats, and then I turn my flat panel off, and I'm done. If you're doing 15-second exposures and you're doing 30 darks, it's going to take 30 times 15 seconds. It's going to take 7 or 8 minutes. Doing 30 flats at maybe a 60th of a second, the flats don't take long to take at all. So it's easy. If you change filters in the middle of the night, you will need to take new flats, and you probably need to refocus. You won't need to take new darks, however, just from changing filters. Anything else? No. If you have any questions, put them down below in the comments section. I'll do my best to answer them. And until I see you again, happy trails.